Hello and welcome to our Winter 2020 MCAP webinar series facilitated by our partners at San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Today is our day 3 of a 3-day webinar series on the topic of understanding the core concepts and principles of universal design for learning to support English learners virtually. If you missed day 1 or day 2 of our series, you may access the recording and resources via our website at multilingualcalifornia.org. You may also subscribe for updates. My name is Dr. Alma Castro. I am the director for the Multilingual California project. MCAP is a 3-year grant awarded to CABE in March this year through the CDE Educator Workforce Investment Grant. The goals of the MCAP grant are to provide professional learning opportunities for teachers, administrators, and paraprofessionals across the state for implementing the English Learner Roadmap policy. The MCAP Alliance includes CABE and 5 county offices of education in Butte, Fresno, San Bernardino, Orange, San Diego, and San Diego State University. The MCAP builds on a robust body of research highlighting multilingualism as the most effective option for academic achievement of English learners across all content areas and for their preparation to participate effectively in the global workforce. As we get ready for today's exciting session, I have a few housekeeping matters to share. As this is a webinar, the speaker's microphone will be active and the participants' microphones will be on mute. If you would like to pose a question during the presentation, please use the chat icon on the Zoom control menu. After today's webinar, we will post the recorded version and resources on our website so that you may access and share with others. We value your input, and at the end of the presentation, we will also ask if you're able to help us complete your survey. Please sit back, relax, and get ready for 45 minutes of powerful online engagement and learning. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome my colleague, Angelica Hurtado from San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Welcome, Angelica.
Thank you. Gracias, Dr. Castro. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Angelica Hurtado. I'm the Program Manager for Multilingual Education at San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Today, I'm joined by a great team of presenters who make up the UDL team and the Multilingual Education team. We have worked together in collaboration to provide you with these 3-day series. At this time, I'm going to introduce the team, and then we will proceed with our presentation. So we have Denise Cates Darnell. She's our coordinator, Pre-K-8 Math. We have Krista Ott, coordinator for Pre-K-8 Literacy. And then we have Rosemary Hyder, who's coordinator for Multilingual Education. So let's get started.
Good afternoon and welcome back to our day 3. I'd like to just review with you a little bit of our learning goals. Through this 3-part series, the first day we looked at the UDL core concepts. Yesterday we looked at UDL design process, and today we're going to focus in on the UDL framework and some strategies that you can implement in your classrooms. We want to remind and thank you, CAST, for providing and giving us permission to use their materials as we have been trained by CAST. So let's take a deeper look into the UDL framework today. We really focused in on the last couple of days on the what and the why. Today is going to be more of a deeper dive into the how. How does the UDL framework support the lesson design process? Through using some essential questions, through accessing some resources and options to address learner variability and to remove those barriers in learning. So we're going to look at the 3 parts of the brain and attach the 3 principles of the UDL framework to the strategic networks. And when we look at going back to what we know about our learning brains, our nervous system is constantly making predictions. It's anticipating how we'll do in a particular learning environment, how we'll do when we start to look and work towards a goal. This is where we or our students as learners decide whether the learning is valuable or not, whether it's worthwhile engaging or not. Emotions are related to the activities at the brain that directs our attention to motivate our behaviors and determine the significance of what's going on around us. So the affective network or the engagement principle in UDL is a crucial element to learning. Learners differ in many different ways, and so the way they engage and motivate in the learning is different as well. With the engagement principles, we need to ask ourselves questions on how to get students engaged, how do we get students to set priorities, and how do we get students to stay motivated. And so we really want to think about that transparent learning pathway so students can get to the goal in the end. So we're going to take a look at a couple of engagement options that we can do. We know that there's a variety of sources that can influence individual variation in the affective network, which also includes neurology, culture, personal relevance, subjectivity, personal background knowledge, along with many other factors. Some learners can be highly engaged by spontaneity and novelty, where others will disengage when you present something new to them. They might even be frightened and avoid engaging. Both of those aspects prefers maybe more of a strict routine. They want to know and anticipate what is coming up, so it has to be transparent. Some learners like to work completely alone, while others like to work with their peers. So we really have to think about multiple means of engagement for all our learners in all contexts. So let's take a look at some engagement options. So in the UDL principle of engagement, we start to ask ourselves, how can we recruit interest in our students? How can we get students to sustain effort and persistence? How can we get students to self-regulate? So some options that you could think about in your classroom might be to recruit interest, show a video, listen to an audio, preview the material to lessen that emotional stress of students who don't like spontaneity. Do an investigation digital board, kind of flip your model and let them do some discovery learning through some links. Have them do a notice and wonder, kind of prepares them for the learning. To sustain effort and persistence, we might want to let them work alone. We might let them work in partners. We might let them work with groups. We can use VoiceThread to share ideas if someone's apprehensive to speak out loud. We can preview the information in the student's language or in the secondary language. And we want to give them options to monitor their goals and their progress towards their goals. In self-regulation, we want to think about presenting materials and having them practice those materials in small chunks. Now, we don't give them everything at once, we give them into bite-sized pieces. We want to invite students to think about their own assessment and how they might monitor their own progress. We want to think about that social emotional connection. The heart of the brain is in the middle, and so is the engagement. So we want to think about that emotional connection. And so we have a little activity here that we usually do with our students on an online, kind of in an online environment where we check the emotion of our participants. And this is called a mood meter. And so when we're on digitally on a Zoom link, we can go into the annotated notes and we can select these star, a check mark, a heart, and we can ask students to kind of show us where they are. And so they will take a look at this chart and decide, am I nervous? Am I worried? Am I energized? Am I proud? Am I glum? Am I ashamed? Am I relaxed? Am I chilled? Basically, what we're looking for is what's the mood of the students I'm working with right now? You can see Denise is dropping in some annotated notes. She's got some hearts and check marks. So I would start to, as a teacher, take a look at where all my check marks, my hearts and stars are falling to see where my students are. There's these 4 quadrants: red, yellow, blue, and green. So if I see that most of my students are starting to fall in that blue quadrant, I know that they have kind of a low amount of energy. They are not very pleasant. They might be sad or lonely if they're kind of hitting that blue quadrant. If they move up to the red quadrant just above, they really have a lot of energy, but it's not positive energy, it's negative. So they're a little angry, they might be even a little fearful. If I move to the yellow quadrant, I notice that my students have a high energy, but they're also very positive. They're in a really good mood. So I can start to adjust my lesson based on to where my students are. If my students are mostly falling in that green quadrant, they're kind of relaxed and chilled. They have low energy, but they're actually very pleasant and very positive and receptive to learning. So as an educator, knowing the participants or my students, how they're doing, helps me to think about how I'm going to have those students engage with me in that moment, in that lesson. So Rosemary is going to share with you now some options for engagement that's connected to the EL roadmap.
Thanks, Krista.
You're welcome.
So as Krista addressed providing students with multiple means of engagement, we just wanted to give you a few more resources and strategies, or remind you of some of the resources you already have from your EL roadmap teacher toolkit that we shared with you yesterday. I was going to say Monday, my days are running across. So just taking a look at this, I know we're all facing this, and things change from week to week, month to month nowadays. So in our face-to-face environment, as the toolkit, we're giving strategies. We have our wall displays reflecting students' cultures and community. The room is arranged for collaboration and discussion in small group. We have our cognates to support, but you can still use those online. But in distance learning, just remembering to giving them those resources that they had from face to face. Establishing those routines still with your students. Check in before starting the class. Displaying student names and pictures of the class in your learning platforms such as Canvas or Blackboard, Moodle, Google Classroom. Want to make sure that you practice your virtual breakout groups for collaboration. Now, if you think about how when I was a teacher, you're scared to let them go, right? So thinking of that in the virtual background, virtual breakout groups, practicing that with your students, increase communication with parents. So you have suggested services that we're going to put the links in the chat for you. So Class Pager, Remind 101, Class Parrot. So we'll put those links for you. And on the next slide.
I'm sorry, Rosemary. I know we've had some challenges with our Zoom, but I don't know if you are able to open your camera.
So sorry. I
apologize.
clicked off the mute and I forgot to click on the remote. Thank you.
Thank you.
See me okay?
Yes, wonderful.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Castro. All right, on our next slide. So as we're talking about face-to-face environment, what you did as a teacher in the classroom there, teacher model, gradual release, things that we can still do in distance learning environment, strategic, flexible grouping, students empowered to actively engage in using key study strategies, such as note-taking, think alouds, AVID strategies that can still be applied, designated ELD, so pulling your small groups, And if you look at, and we are going to put in the chat for you, if you're not familiar how to create breakout rooms with your students, go ahead. It's a YouTube video that can help you create those. I mean, to learn how to do that. And predetermine those groups, create a schedule to meet with certain groups throughout the day, set up partners, require each student to respond to each other's works and ideas. In this environment, it's really important that we allow our students to speak. And I think we're going to address that again on the next slide. Some strategies for you there in active engagement. So all students are actively engaged in discussing what they're learning. Those academic conversations, sentence frames, and sentence starters are really valuable during this. You can put them in the chat for your students so that they can start those. The sentence frames, so we have from Zweiers, and it's the talking chips. And Kagan structures are also used in this environment. And that's a resource from Dr. Kate Kinsella on the right-hand corner there. So again, using those resources that you still have, it's not anything new that you have to jump into and say, I have to learn all these new things because we're in distance learning. A lot of the things that you used in the classroom to engage your English learners, it's still applicable now, just thinking about how you're going to use it in the distance learning environment. And it all ties in with UDL. Here under the engagement, and this slide here, it's a resource for you. We're going to put the link in the chat. And again, as Denise was going through, not Denise, Krista is going through those engagement, those points there, there's examples for you of what, if you're wondering what it could look like in your classroom and what it looks like, or you're doing it, check it off like, oh, good, I'm already doing this. So again, resources for you to practice engagement in this distance learning. And I think we're up to our next slide.
So what we're going to have you do now is kind of take a few moments just to collect your thoughts around engagement and those questions of recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, and having students practice some self-regulation when they're engaging in the learning. We want you to think about a word or a phrase that will remind you of the importance of engagement. We're going to put into the chat box a link to a Mentimeter. When you get in there, just the directions on top will just say to write in a word or phrase, and then Denise will pull that up and we'll see what the collective group is starting to think and feel around engagement. Thank you, Denise. There is a QR code on that slide too, but the link in the chat box will be the best. So what you'll do here is you'll see your Mentimeter. It'll look like this green right here. And Denise is typing in an example. It says, drop in a word or short phrase that supports the importance of engagement. So she's putting in 3 words. She's thinking about something that's action related, that promotes participation and has students focused in on the learning. And then she submits that. Okay, we're going to give Denise a minute to pull that up so we can start seeing what we're all putting in there. And Denise, if you are having...
I'm having challenges to finding So I'm going to come back to that if you want to.
Okay. We have been having trouble with our computers all day today. Denise, would you like me to share my screen?
Oh, sure. Krista, that'll be
Okay.
fantastic.
See if I can get it to pull up.
Kristen, as you're pulling up your presentation, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and share that for those of you that are joining us in this webinar. If you look through the chat, there are many resources that have already been placed on the chat. Feel free to open the tabs, download these. And just as a reminder, we will have the recording and the resources posted on our multilingualcalifornia.org website.
You can see me spinning here, right?
Yes, I think it's loading. Also, participants, if you'd like to pose any questions, feel free to go ahead and pose your questions on the chat function as our facilitators load the information for you. I think there's a question about the Kate Kinsella resource. And thank you, Anya. I think you just dropped it on there as well. Krista, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you. All right, so you can take a look here and see if I can expand my screen for us here. It might be a little small, but I will get it as large as I can. So what we have in the center, very large, is participation. So that's kind of the number one idea that most people are starting to think is, I have to get my kids participated. I need them to participate in the learning. I want them to be active learning. I want them to have interest. I want them to be motivated. I know I have to provide access and variety. I do like that word fun there, because when we have creativity for our students, then that will engage them. So just standing and presenting information isn't always the way to engage our students. And that's why we think of different ways to get them interested in the learning, through videos, through audios, through recordings. I'm kind of leaning here that participation will lead towards growth and getting to that end in mind. Let's see, purpose and access. Always having purpose and access, because you're always thinking about that goal in mind. So you know that whatever you are having to plan for engagement is purposeful. It's not just a fun activity that's disconnected from the learning. It does have to connect to what you're presenting as far as the goal. Collaboration, especially for those students that like to work with someone else. But if they don't, then please provide those students with another option. So lots of really great ideas here. I'm just going to call out a few more before I pass it off. Really thinking about that social emotional piece. This is the principle that connects to that. And if you can break that barrier of the social emotional piece, then you're often running to the next two principles. So thank you for sharing. Denise, I'll let you take it back.
Okay, so we want to move on to our next principle, which is representation, which is the recognition network that we had talked about yesterday. So your brain receives sensory signals from what's going on around you all the time, constantly. Light through your eyes, sound waves coming in through your ears, smell, touch, taste. And those signals are shaped by your learning, by your memory, your expectation, and your attention. The brain takes this kind of low-level information and transfers it into higher level information that connects limits to your knowledge and selective mechanisms such as attention. And each one of us is unique in the way we perceive and take in information. So we want to ensure by providing lots of options that we are supporting our students in being able to tap in to those different ways that we take in knowledge and information. So once again, we want to look at some options for you in the representation principle here. Because learners come in with different ways that they perceive and comprehend that information, we want to ensure that, we know some may simply grasp information more quickly or more efficiently through visual or auditory means rather than through printed text. So we want to ensure that we are giving them a wide variety of opportunities for learning using those multiple representations. They allow students to make connections within as well as between concepts. And in short, there's not one means of representation that will be optimal for all learners. So providing options for representation is really essential. So in representation, we really have three key guidelines that we want to look at, and that is perception, language and symbols, and comprehension. So with perception, it's really how we're taking in information. So some of the things we might do to support our students are thinking of previewing text, maybe in their home language, or using storyboards or props to help tell the story before we read it. So we're providing scaffolds for them, cards for things that they might be listening for, if I'm listening for the actions that a character is going to take, or perhaps mnemonic devices to help me remember things. When we get into the language and symbol guideline, we're thinking of focusing in on vocabulary, but how can I support vocabulary learning with pictures, with drawings, with other things? And really, that vocabulary learning has to be very personalized, doesn't it? Because we all have had a variety of experience learning different words and hearing them. Another piece that it can be very easily accessible now is to use closed captioning. So many things, if we use videos on YouTube now, all we have to do is press the closed caption button and we can get closed captions for our students, or using voice to text for them to support readings, and supporting them as well with vocabulary tools, maybe online. In comprehension, we get some more in-depth things. We want to think about maybe pairing visuals with a text. Now, we know that we do this automatically for really young children. We provide them in books that we're reading with pictures that are really rich and detailed, with hints about what's going on in the text. So providing some more visuals for our students can really help them to build their comprehension. Or offering choice amongst readings that we might be doing. I was thinking of a time when I had my kids studying about the Revolutionary War, and there's a wealth of options of short, fun books that students can select to read, from the classics like Johnny Tremain and Ben and Me to newer things like the American Girl series, or even Ashes that talks about slaves' adventures during Revolutionary War. So students can make connections that really are personal to them, putting themselves in that place. And another opportunity is thinking about using some kind of roadmaps or supports to help students go through informational text. So just wanted to share with you one idea that we used, and this is a Jamboard where we took and put the text that we were going to read right on there, because you know it's really hard sometimes. Students can't write in their textbooks, but we want them to interact with it. And on the Jamboard, you can see we put stars and hearts and exclamations and questions and smiley faces. So a whole variety of things so that students could interact. So a star could be something that was really important that came along. A heart could be, oh, something that I really loved when I was looking at that. That was a really fun piece. An exclamation point might be, oh, something that surprised me as I read through the text. And I had some other ways that they could interact as well. So when a student actually responded to a text, I can see right now as we're looking through and as we go through together, we could see that, oh, that first little picture, they really thought that was great, fun, interesting. But I can also see that there's a couple of words that they highlighted. Those were words that they wanted to go back and see if they could clarify the meaning. Pudgy and glossy, those aren't words that most elementary kids might know. So they needed to go back and take a look and see if they could understand a little bit better. But you'll also notice there's an exclamation point by that sentence. There are 25 different kinds of chipmunks. Wow, I didn't know that either when I was reading through it. And there's a question mark by, they are excellent tree climbers and swimmers. So you can see that they're making connections to the text, building their understanding as they continue to annotate. So giving them tools like this, super easy, and a Jamboard, and really interesting and ways that they can go ahead and interact with that. Angelica, do you want to pick up from here? Uh-oh. I think Angelica.
Okay, am I back?
Back.
Am I back? Am I back? Okay, I better
Yes.
start before my internet goes crazy. Okay, so making another connection with the EL roadmap under Principle 2. So one way that we can help our English learners process and understand material in English is to offer primary language resources and opportunities, such as providing access to English dictionaries, to reference materials and digital translators. Here on the left side of the slide, we have provided you with 4 of the top translator apps based on uncubed.com. And I want to share the first one. The first one is iTranslate Voice. And this one enables magical voice-to-voice communication across languages. Simply speak into your phone and the app will translate and speak that sentence into one of 42 languages. Okay, so then the second app is Say Hi. And no typing is necessary when you use the app. You simply speak into the device and the app will translate and then transcribe a message to be seen and heard by your counterpart. Say Hi has also 90 languages and dialects, which is different, right? So that all those are covered, and even allows you to choose the speed at which your translated voice will be expressed. So that's pretty cool. And then the third app is Text Grabber. And Text Grabber allows you to point your phone's camera at the inscrutable text in front of you or the students and instantly translate it to a language of your choosing. And lastly, we have Microsoft Translator. And it's probably the most versatile option on the market right now. Users can type the text they want to translate, speak aloud, or take a photo of an image containing the text. And the translator is also available. You can use it in your iOS, on your smartwatch, and your Android as well. So I recommend that if your districts don't have that, maybe you can talk to someone in charge and suggest it for them to get it, specifically if you have newcomers and emerging English learners. So going back to our second bullet on our slide, so when possible, teachers also, they can also do primary language support to help the students comprehend the text. So teacher can go in and out of language, providing the primary language support at that instant or at that moment. And then of course, having available web resources and online tools for your students. And then maybe you can walk them through the resources so that they can become familiar with the links and the layout of the website. So let's go to the next one. And so here, again, under Roadmap Principle 2, here's another way that you can help English learner students make meaning of the text and content, and by taking time really to look at good quality and relevance of curriculum and material. So make sure that when you're looking and selecting your curriculum, that you find such things as, or features as standards, up-to-date information with current issues, that it includes clear visuals and graphs that will really make the content comprehensible for your English learners. And remember, it's about giving the access to the content and then helping your students comprehend it. So another important feature to look for in the curriculum materials is that they include and reflect the voices and contributions of diverse groups. Most of all, the students' heritage and lives. The students need to see themselves in the curriculum. That's an important point. You know, I was touched when my daughter shared something with me. She's also a teacher, and she told me that last week she shared different dances around the world for a certain social studies lesson during synchronous class. And one of her students of Philippine descent was so proud of her culture. She shared pictures of her family performing Filipino dances. She shared it with her family. Then her mom sent a positive note, and crying also. She said how proud she was of her daughter because she heard her share with the family about her experience. The mom thought that the child had lost the pride for her culture because she hadn't heard the child mention that anymore. So I believe that's how important the curriculum is, you know, to have those features in our curriculum for our students. So on the left side of the slide, you can see an example of all the important text features that the rich curriculum should have. And all these features will help English learners navigate the text and understand it as they read it. So I invite you to take some time to walk through all these features with your students, you know, during your online instruction, if possible. That way your students can be able to navigate that text when you're not there, asynchronous time. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so one example, and Denise talked about vocabulary instruction. So one example of how you can help your English learners learn vocabulary is by doing in an interactive way, using the Frayer model and Jamboard. So Jamboard seems to be popular, right? The Frayer model is a graphic organizer. In case you don't know about it, it's a graphic organizer for building student vocabulary. And this technique requires students to define target vocabulary and give characteristics and apply their knowledge by generating examples and non-examples, which is very powerful. They can also draw pictures to illustrate the meaning of the word. And also the teacher should always model. Remember, model for the students the process before you engage them in that activity. The strategy is also included in the ELD toolkit that we shared with you on day 1. Okay, so let's look at an example. Here's an example using Jamboard of the Frayer model, and it was shared at the California Assessment Conference. So clearly you can see the different ways that participants or students engaged in providing words or a phrase in each of the 4 squares. Also notice how there are pictures. There's not only words or phrases, but there's also pictures. So you can think of that as, you know, providing those options for your students when you engage in this activity. So we'll have Denise go over this one.
I'm just going to pop in a link as well in the chat for a video, and I believe that was kind of on how to get Jamboard set up. If you would like to use that, we used Jamboard a lot. It's a great app for really getting a lot of interaction with students. So this is just another example, the infographic that gives you some additional ideas. We really liked these because it's so visual. On the left, you've got the guidelines there that you can see. And then for each of the checkpoints, if you follow the line, you have an example of an activity or a strategy that you can do in class. I particularly like that there's a visual representation as well as pictures and as well as text there, so that you can really make some good decisions about some things that you might want to add to your classroom there. We are going to skip this activity, I think, based on time, because we're kind of running close and we want to make sure we get you to the very last piece that we're going to do. So Krista, take it away.
Yep. So the last principle is that action and expression. We really want students to express what they know once the learning is done. We want to consider how they can show us what they know and understand, and did they reach the learning goal. We know that they do, they will show us that in different ways. We need to have some flexible ways to provide and demonstrate that attainment of learning. And it does take some planning, organizing, and expressing on behalf of the teacher, but more importantly, on behalf of the student. And so what we want to do is think about different ways that we can get students to show us what they know with movement. Maybe we want to have them do physical response cards. Maybe we want them to use sentence starters and prompts. We want them to get up and move and show us with gestures what they've learned, ways to get physically engaged in showing us what they have learned. We want to have different ways to express and communicate. We know that some students can really express themselves well with writing, whereas others really struggle with writing. Maybe I'm very good at talking and I can explain everything about what I've learned, but I can't write it down. And so maybe I have to have an option where I can explain to you what I've learned, either auditorily or on a recording. So these are some different types of ways that I can show what I've learned through expression and communication. Maybe I let my kids create a quiz for themselves. This is always very interesting when you give students a quiz and then at the end you ask them, tell me one question you wish I had asked you, or tell me one thing you learned that I didn't ask you. When they start to explain themselves what they connected to within the content, then you get to see their representation of the learning and how it connected with them. Another good one is to make a poster, a PowerPoint, paper PowerPoint, and record it with the phone. Some students need that support of having a visual to look at so that they can narrate that. Most of all, we want to move them into that executive functions range. We want them to be able to calendar out tasks if they've got a long-term project. We want them to be able to set their own goals, set their own schedules, and to stay on top of it. So at this point, you really become a facilitator to the student's product. So when you think about action and expression, it is really the students producing a product to show what they know. And I just have to give them a multitude of ways to do it. And a multiple choice test is what we typically fall back onto. But that is probably not the one and only option you want to give students. I did provide for you there, if you back up just a little bit, Denise, on that Flipgrid response there, I just popped in real quick, if you don't mind going into that. I recorded from Epic Books. I turned off the volume and I just recorded a book here. It was called My Monster. And if I was a student, I would have my students retell me the story by flipping through the pages. I don't want them to read the story to me because that's not the goal. I want them to retell it. And so if you click in the middle there, Denise, in the middle of the picture, the sound will come on. Yeah, there's an arrow that'll come on there. And so you can hear, oh, that's okay. So what do you do with Flipgrid or Screencastify is you can grab an electronic book and you can have students read it. And then at the end of the week, you can ask them, record yourself telling the story in your own words. They don't have to write it. They just have to retell it using the pictures to help them through. So I'm going to let Angelica take a look at some other options that you can do for action and expression.
Yeah, so here's another connection to Principal 2 and making sure that we provide critical thinking and inquiry-based learning. So here's another example here to do that. You can invite your students to collaboratively show their learning by giving meaningful, by having them do meaningful project-based and inquiry-based assignments. One example here that you see on the left side is a GLAD strategy. It's called a pictorial input chart, where the teacher presents information in chunks, in categories and subtopics. The teacher uses color coding, as you can see, for each chunk of the lesson. The chart also includes academic vocabulary, and throughout the process, the teacher and students are working collaboratively. So the little Post-its perhaps are the ones that the student has collaborated with the teacher. So that's a good way of the teacher really seeing how much the students learned throughout that period of time for the lesson. So you can see on the slide, some of the bullets were also mentioning the presentations that they can do. They can get into their little Socratic seminars. So, you know, there's different ways in addition to what Krista also described. And then I really love these infographics because it really gives us examples in each of the areas. So for instance, this one is an example for the action. And you can see here just the different examples that you have for all of the representation here for the checkpoints. Just in different areas. You know, once you just go to each of those little sections there that you want to make sure you cover, it gives you just, you know, I don't have to read the examples to you, but just by you looking at them, you can get ideas there. That's why I love this infographic, because it's so helpful. And I know Denise is going to summarize this one.
We just wanted to remind you yesterday that we had given you a couple of links of things for you to explore. So we gave you the Genially that had links for you to look at to digital tools, and then also the CAST link that gave you the framework so that it is a living document that you can use to find all the information that you would like to about all kinds of activities that you can add into your classroom. So just thinking about a final thought as we close up for today, we know this is from Mike Murata. He's talked about how UDL is not a special ed thing. It's not a general ed thing. I'm going to continue and say it's not an EL thing. It's just an ed thing. So it's really what we want to bring to all of our classrooms to make them effective for our students. So we'd like to thank you so much for sharing with us, your time with us these 3 days, and hope that we've given you some new strategies and ideas that you'll be able to implement into your classrooms.
Thank you, Denise. And we want to say thank you to our colleagues from San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools, Angelica Hurtado, who helped us bring this to you, this 3-day webinar in collaboration with our colleagues, Krista Ott, Denise Cates Darnell, and Rosemary Hyder. Thank you so much for all of the work behind the scenes to bring together this 3-day UDL and supporting English learners during distance learning webinar series. Participants, we want to remind you that the recordings of each individual webinar will be available on our multilingualcalifornia.org website. You will want to subscribe for updates of future free resources and webinars. We should have all of this information up by next week. We also want to invite you to share in the chat box any suggestions of other professional learning that you would like in the near future. In the chat box, you'll see our participant survey. We invite you to complete that for us as well. And we are growing in our social media friends, and we'd like to invite you to be our friend, follow us, and also share information about your handles, but follow us at Multilingual California. On behalf of MCAP, we hope that you and your families continue to stay safe, managing the circumstances of COVID-19. And we are thankful that you have joined us for 1, 2, or 3 days of this series. Again, thank you so much from MCAP to San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools, our colleagues that did just a fabulous job in presenting today's webinar. We wish you a great evening, and thank you for completing those surveys. Thank you. Buenas noches. Have a good evening, everyone.